what's coming this year and in the future?
What's coming this year and in the future? Well, that's always the oracle question of the entire internet, right? But to me, it seems on the cloud computing side, I think you're going to see a lot more people take advantage of this. And I think you're going to see it move down market into smaller and smaller enterprises. And that's going to be enabled by two things. One, you got to have connectivity. But two, really, the more interesting one is probably that these tools are become more user-friendly so that you can do these application moves without an IT department. And that's really the gap. You know, big companies can do all kinds of inventive stuff because they have a whole IT department. The IT department can help figure out how to make it work. The question is how does your 40-person company take advantage of this? And you have to remember that at least in the US, the small businesses are a huge percentage of the economy. And if you can take advantage of those in terms of getting their applications onto the cloud and things, that really represents a whole new market that hasn't been tapped very aggressively by anything other than like hosted email. And I think that's kind of an interesting discussion. I think that's what we're going to see this year.
Yeah, it's definitely true. I know personally working with a lot of the vendors we have for operating systems for, as I said, network appliances previously, everyone's trying to make ways to package your applications. One example is SUSE has an actual application deployment manager that no matter what cloud you're going to, even if you're going to your own environment, irrespective of what hypervisor you're using, whether you're using something like VMware ESXi or you're using Xen or anything else for that matter that's supported under the actual cloud management system you've chosen, it deploys the applications out there just as easily from one to another, and it's kind of created a unified API. So those unified APIs are something that's going to grow, that are being promoted by the actual platform or OS manufacturers, and it's something that didn't exist before. It used to be that there were very few. There was a vCloud API that was shared across many companies, but most people were writing for AWS or trying to write for the services, and it really wasn't quite the same when it came time. They wanted to go and migrate to a different provider for one reason or another.
Well, actually touching on that, I think there's been some interesting examples of migrations that weren't super fun. And if you've been using it for long enough, the one people might remember is Netflix. Netflix had kind of a rocky couple months from a website reliability standpoint when it first moved to AWS. And that was kind of an example of moving when the infrastructures were much more proprietary and had to be customized quite aggressively to the specific cloud host. And that's probably the best example I can think of because it's a large public site, one of the first ones that went entirely in the cloud. And by the way, don't confuse their website being in the cloud with their video being in AWS. Their video is not at AWS and has never been. But it's an interesting point to talk about because they had, I think, 4 or 5 very high-profile outages of their public site where it just didn't work under various Amazon failure scenarios they hadn't yet discovered.
Of course, and I mean, that's the problem that exists. I mean, it's really something with, even with all this specialization, that there are a lot of management tools available to the companies out there, but it just takes one person in a data center that's doing maintenance. I think the last major outage was on Christmas Day, something like that. It's not always in the middle of the night that you're seeing these things, but that's why a hybrid environment works out very well for people. If they run into those problems, they can quite easily migrate and shift around based on where their needs are and what's working best for them at that point.
Well, I think one of the things you may see is hybrid from cloud to cloud a lot more. And this actually comes back to the same cycle I was mentioning earlier with CDNs. What the big content owners have been doing on the content distribution network side is a lot of them are using multiple CDNs and arbitraging between them based on performance. And I think you're going to see that happen more and more with the actual application hosting on the cloud side. I don't care if this cloud provider's down or the CDN's down. I'm going to serve it all out of the other one. And if you can write your applications to support that, that's really quite an attractive thing. And that's probably the neatest part about these third-party overlays and tools is that allow you to use multiple open platforms to protect against failures in other open platforms.
Exactly, and just kind of following up, since it's new and in the future, I mean, the products that are being generated this year, they allow for the ease of management across many providers are one of the big things, but what's really fueling all of this is the connectivity that's going in between these places, whether it's between multiple clouds within a data center and getting direct connections into your cloud provider, or getting connectivity into your office or existing infrastructure, wherever it may be. And that bandwidth that's available and the actual amount of it being powered by the fiber optic networks and the transport carriers is what's really driving all of this to be possible. You can truly migrate an application in real time. You're not kind of limited to the constraints of what you have in a virtualized environment with an IPsec tunnel running over traditional internet. You have dedicated and reliable bandwidth. in continuity.
Yeah, and I think that's another change we've been seeing is irrespective of what's in the news about fiber deployments to homes, fiber deployments to businesses are alive and well in the U.S. And there's multiple people, myself included, in this room who spend most of their time figuring out new fiber builds and spend lots of capital dollars building them, and that's because of this demand. That's what it's fueling, and you can argue all you want about the United States being behind in broadband, but it really isn't behind in broadband in a commercial sense. It's behind in broadband in a residential sense, and that's really only because of a U.S. invented thing of suburbia and underground power and everything, and only 2 utilities that can do the service. And so you spread out the population, that's hard. But the businesses communities aren't subject to that problem, and
Yeah.
therefore fiber's available.
Exactly. It's definitely true.